we'll see what happens. As Philly is Pennsylvania, there is speculation there that it will be the governor.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, what we know about the possible vice presidential pick, Josh Shapiro. Now that President Biden has halted his re-election campaign, all eyes are on Vice President Kamala Harris and her own running mate shortlist ahead of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. One name getting a lot of attention of late is Josh Shapiro, the 51-year-old Pennsylvania governor who took office last year. A Harris victory over former President Donald Trump in November relies on carrying Pennsylvania and its 19 electoral votes. Well, for some insight on Shapiro and his career, we're joined by Ben Wasserstein, Capitol Bureau Chief at WITF in Harrisburg.
Thank you for having me.
So what's the buzz like around the Capitol in recent days with this speculation about Shapiro?
Well, House Democrats almost immediately started tweeting out hashtag Harris Shapiro. So they're seemingly in support of a Shapiro on the ticket alongside Harris. So it seems like there is some buzz going around, some hope, although we still don't entirely know what's going to happen. We do know that next week in Philly, there is going to Vice President Harris will be having an event with her running mate on Tuesday. So we'll see what happens. As Philly is Pennsylvania, there is speculation there that it will be the governor. Although in past cases, the running mate hasn't always been announced in the state that they're from. You can see that even with J.D. Vance, who was announced in Wisconsin, despite being from Ohio.
We've heard a lot about Shapiro's popularity in Pennsylvania. Is that still true today, now that he's been in office for, a year and a half?
Yes, it's still fairly true. He has, I believe it's pretty high approval ratings, around 60%. He manages to attract a lot of the moderates. He did run against Doug Mastriano in 2022, who was backed by Trump. So that ended up helping him in a lot of ways, as well as just how Mastriano's campaign ran. They weren't really doing any debates. It wasn't exactly the same as what Shapiro was doing. So Shapiro still retains a good amount of popularity in the state and is supported fairly wide among a lot of the more centrist people.
What did Shapiro do before being elected governor?
So he was the state attorney general, and he was also a state representative for Montgomery County, one of the counties around Philadelphia. But as attorney general, he did a good amount of things, one of which was cracking down on the Catholic Church and sexual abuse by some of the priests. And he also was pretty involved with attempts to audit and overturn the election results of 2020.
Now, Pennsylvania is always looked at in terms of kind of two ends of the state. You've got Pittsburgh politics, which are different from Philadelphia politics, and then everything in between. What was the key to his electoral victory in 2022? What's his coalition look like?
Well, traveling the state, getting in touch with people from all across the state. I mean, in Harrisburg and Dauphin County has been starting to turn a little bit more blue than it was in the past. So getting the center, getting the rural, more red areas of the state to come along to him and say, yeah, we're for Shapiro. So he's been able to just empathize with a lot of the voters that typically Democrats are not really engaging with. And that was part of his success, as well as something that Senator Bob Casey, who's also running for re-election this year, has been talking about frequently, is just engaging in those rural communities to get those votes.
Now, how has he governed? What's been his profile as governor? What are his top priorities?
So one of his top priorities is ensuring that there are menstrual products in school bathrooms that they're easily accessible. He has also gotten some criticism over his support of school vouchers. Now, ultimately, those have not become a thing in Pennsylvania yet, In his first budget, he ended up line item vetoing it from the budget to prevent a large impasse and ensure that the services that needed to be funded were funded as soon as possible. But that is some of the things. He's also been a big proponent of LGBT rights and just running the gamut of a lot of the norm moderate Democrat policies.
Now, what are some of the downsides in Shapiro's profile that I'm sure the Harris vetting team is looking at? Everyone's got them.
Well, one of those is the vouchers, as I previously mentioned. Another is his support of Israel. He has criticized Netanyahu a lot, calling him one of the worst leaders, although he has also called on the University of Pennsylvania's president to step down amid the protests. And in an interview with CNN, he seemingly aligned the protesters with the KKK, drawing a lot of criticism and questions about free speech and First Amendment rights. And then on top of that, there's also early in his career, there's his Secretary of Legislative Affairs, Mike Vereb, was accused of sexual harassment, and it ended up costing the taxpayers about close to $300,000 in settling that case. So those are some of the downsides that he has. There's still a lot that we don't know about some of those because NDAs are also pretty frequent within his administration. So some stuff with transparency is a little bit of an issue sometimes.
What happens if Shapiro is selected to be on the ticket and the ticket wins in November to the governorship in Pennsylvania?
Well, if Shapiro wins, then the Lieutenant Governor, Austin Davis, will take over as governor. That would mean that the President pro tem of the Senate, who is a Republican, Kim Ward from Westmoreland County, would take over as Lieutenant Governor. So it could cause some issues, although the lieutenant governor's powers are fairly limited. They are in charge of the parole board, but they are relatively limited compared to what the governor is able to do and accomplish. And this isn't the first time. This wouldn't be the first time that there's a party difference between the governor and lieutenant governor. That happened in 2008, following the death of the lieutenant governor, in which the Republican pro tem became lieutenant governor. He chose not to run for re-election in 2010 for that role. So it's not uncommon for that to happen.
I think another figure from Pennsylvania politics who most people know now is the Senator John Fetterman, who used to be lieutenant governor also. What do we know about the Fetterman-Shapiro relationship and the kind of role that Fetterman might play in this fall election?
So Fetterman has not been that outright this election. We haven't seen him doing too many campaign stops in Pennsylvania. He did speak out against people who wanted to drop Biden from the ticket prior to Biden dropping out of the race. Senator Casey, however, has been much more prominent in many events, although I should note he is also up for re-election this year. So on top of trying to campaign for the Harris ticket, he's also campaigning for himself.
And just as a reporter, I'm curious, when you're in Harrisburg, is he a governor who is around a lot? Does he do a lot of press conferences? What kind of profile does he have in the city?
So it would really depend on who you ask. He does seem to have a big presence. He does have a lot of rallies across the state, really. He does stuff in Pittsburgh, in the Harrisburg area fairly frequently. Some say that he isn't too involved, such as during budget negotiations, although he had stopped in the Capitol, walking to the cafeteria to pick up some chicken tenders at one point. So it really depends on who you ask. He is frequently in Harrisburg. He is frequently doing ceremonial bill signings. He doesn't normally do public bill signings. It is kind of a rare occasion, although he does have those happen sometimes. He has events for a lot of Jewish holidays, frankly, some not necessarily holidays, but memorials. There was a big Yom HaShoah memorial when that happened a couple months ago. So he has a profile, definitely to say, but whether or not it's big depends on who you ask.
We've been speaking with the reporter Ben Wasserstein, who covers the Capitol for WITF in Harrisburg, about the prospect of Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro joining the Democratic ticket, which we'll know any day. Ben, great spending some time with you, and thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.